right. Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for attending AthasCon's panel. We appreciate everyone here today. I am one of the hosts, June Solar, and I am with Jack Meyer, a member and team lead for AthasCon.org, as well as Rob Adducci, who has long been the steward of all things Dark Sun through the Athas.org website. Today, we have the pleasure of having with us Tim Brown, the co-creator of Dark Sun, as well as Alan Varney, who has been the author for Veiled Alliance, one of the probably the most looked at accessories that we've had for Dark Sun in a long time. So, gentlemen, thank you for coming, and thank you all the attendees for attending. We'll be broadcasting this as well on the Discord and the Stone, Bone, and Obsidian podcast. Rob, you got anything?
Thanks, June. I appreciate you letting us kind of put this on the podcast. It's good to see you, Tim, and good to meet you, Alan.
Hello, Robert. Good to see you too.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure to see Tim again after I guess several decades apart. Tim and I both started in the game industry at just about the same time. We were kind of the part of what we might call a third wave of designers in the role-playing field.
Like that, yeah.
With Gary and Dave and Greg Stafford back in the early primordial age, and then they had this whole round of great followers like Steve Jackson and Kevin Symbieta and others of that, and Mike Stackpole. Many of those still active today. And then Tim and I both started in the mid 80s, along with many others. And in fact, Tim and I both got started in much the same way. I started at Steve Jackson Games in 1984 as an assistant editor, and I edited their magazine there at Steve Jackson Games, Space Gamer. And likewise, Tim, I believe, started at Game Designers Workshop, editing Challenge magazine. Do I have that right, Tim?
Well, that's probably not my first thing at Game Designers Workshop, but actually started hanging around there in the embarrassingly early mid to late 70s as just a kid playtesting games for them, just a kid. And then I started actually did warehouse work for them as I moved into design and started working on games like Traveler and Twilight 2000. Had a few products that I worked on in there, then started editing our magazine Challenge that eventually was before that Journal of the Traveler's Aid Society. It was all a traveler-based thing, but then it expanded to be a part all of Game Designers Workshop's role-playing games at the time. But yeah, then I went on to do other things, eventually leading me to TSR in beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, where I ended up living for 20 years. It was great, but for 6 years I was sort of head of the product development team that was working on everything second edition mainly through that time, and my gateway into that was as a young designer there. I got the opportunity to work on a brand new project that eventually became Dark Sun. It was great. Those were heady days, my friends, very heady. We enjoyed it.
It was.
And sorry, I was just gonna say, if anybody wants to hear more about that, on episode 8 of the Bone Stone and Obsidian podcast, we had Tim on, and so he told us all kinds of secrets, so definitely go listen to that.
Well, maybe they were secrets then. They can't be secrets now. Too much time has passed, right?
Yes.
It was top secret once. In fact, it really was top secret once. There were even code names for the project and things like that. Called it War World for the longest time, and tried to make sure that nothing got scooped out in the I guess the magazine sphere, which is really the only gateway or the only communication, frankly, between companies then and their consumer and the people buying the games, was just through Dragon Magazine. We didn't want anything to slip or anything to get out. So yeah, we had a good time making all that. But yeah, that we went through a lot of those details in that previous podcast. So if you want to go check that out, very, very cool.
It was you and Troy Denning and Mary
Correct.
Kirchhoff, right? And then later Brahm came aboard.
Yeah, I actually think that the latter two were kind of flopped in order. We were working with Brahm, I think, before Mary was heavily involved. But Brahm, of course, was a new artist on the scene at TSR in those days, and he had such a unique style. We were very fortunate, Troy and I, to begin working with him. And that relationship, of course, I've said in many other interviews, was just so unique at the time that we really wanted to develop a world with an artist rather than create a world strictly amongst us writers and then ask an artist to illustrate it. We really got Brom in on the ground floor. Then quickly thereafter, once the design of the universe itself got further along and we knew what we were about to do, and novels were going to suddenly be on the horizon, that's when Mary Kirchhoff, head of the book department, Mary got involved and started working, especially with Troy and me, to get those original novels all outlined and sorted out and ready to go. So, but that was basically the team.
That was the golden age of meta plot, and I don't know how many of our audience were around in the 80s and mid 90s, but there was certainly a vogue, spawned partly by White Wolf and then by others, of having this overarching narrative that embraced many supplements and pushed the world forward and changed so much. And Dark Sun was almost, I think, the first TSR product line that really leaned hard, well, along with the Realms and the time, the Forgotten Realms, but leaned hard into the meta plot, as such that I think the whole initial Prism Pentad sequence was all set in place before you even started the campaign set. Am I right, or do I have that wrong?
As far as getting it outlined so that we knew it was going to happen in each story, yes. They weren't produced in advance. They weren't all written in advance of all of the plotting for the role-playing game. But Troy was well ahead of the game and had all 5 of those novels well outlined as he was just getting the first one underway, and as the role-playing game itself and its original materials were reaching the market. So, but we wanted the whole thing to hang together. We thought we had a chance to do a lot of innovative things. We were pretty excited about bringing Dungeons and Dragons, bringing to it for the first time sort of a pulp fantasy feel that hadn't been done before. And at the same time, we were pretty excited that
was everything good?
Yeah, sorry, that just
we've got new attendees. I don't know what's going on here.
Apologies. Continue. Sorry.
I remember
that's all right.
I remember you telling
just,
me, Tim, when I was asking, so what actually goes on, or how do you envision the Dark Sun campaign? And you described to me the idea that it would be just the player characters kind of knocking around the setting from gig to gig. They might start out in a bandit gang, say, and then a monster kills everyone in the gang, and so the player characters join an army next, and then that goes for a while, and then they might head up a band of mercenaries. And it had this kind of Conan-esque sort of feel, this sense of transitioning from one career to another to another.
Yeah, that was sort of our objective, and Conan was very influential in that. And the idea that, as we saw, if you just read through all of the various stories of Conan, his fortunes rise and fall rather a lot with the telling of each tale. And we thought that would be an interesting way for the game, for players in Dark Sun to progress as well. And looking at the basic rules of first and second edition, and the way most campaigns that any of us were familiar with, the fortunes of the characters went on a steady trajectory upwards with very few setbacks, to be honest, unless it was really built into the campaign or really called for by the game master. But we wanted a setting that sort of embraced that from the beginning, that you might be on top of the world in one adventure and really starting from scratch again, at least economically, in the very next. And that would give a more diverse and, again, pulp-like feel to the whole thing. So, yeah. And I think it worked out pretty well.
Yeah, I can't think of any other campaign setting that TSR published that had that sort of hard Scrabble feel, at least early on. And I feel like that must still be a part of the attraction that keeps people like the Athas.org people and all the fans that are keeping the memory alive must have attracted them in the first place. And yet, in another sense, the Dark Sun world kind of expanded in that campaign sense to become really the high end of the whole AD&D experience. While you were TSR's head of product development. You wrote the Dragon Kings hardcover rulebook, which, by the way, I edited.
Yes, you
And
did.
then that was for levels 21 to 30 and introduced 10th level spells and psionic enchantment. And so eventually Dark Sun kind of transmogrified, or at least grew to encompass the very highest end kind of adventures that players had seen up to that time.
Yeah, I think we put out the original game, and just the simple thing of having characters start at third level, and these things sort of gave everybody the impression, ooh, this is a more difficult, more violent, more desperate setting, which we thought was probably a good a bit of marketing. The actual Dragon Kings book itself came about as I wanted to introduce higher levels of magic, as you well know, basically because I didn't see in second edition at that time, even up through ninth level spells, so many of them are just, here's the bigger and better way to defeat the monster standing right in front of you. And none of that was speaking to me of the sort of more epic magic that might be, cooked up by some wizard or some ancient priest who's got 1,000 monks chanting for 6 months to try and get some big massive spell to go. So that sort of thing I thought had its place in the Dark Sun setting. So I wanted to make sure that it got proper coverage. So yeah, we created that hardbound, and you and I went back and forth many times, as I recall, as we should. But yeah, I think the end result there gave everybody sort of a new look at where Magic might go in that kind of a campaign as it gets higher and higher. So
how do you think that affected the field going forward, especially the sort of D&D approach?
That's a very good question. I think it was much of what was done in Dark Sun was taken to heart for a lot of future editions of the Dungeons and Dragons game as it's gone forward. But that's true of a lot of different settings as well. I mean, things were taken from all over it, and for the most part, every time a new edition comes out, it has managed to take some of the better pieces of each of the game settings and sort of incorporated the best, gotten rid of the rest. But it's just good to be part of the legacy, the formative pieces that eventually have become what, in my opinion, the new edition, the latest edition, 5e, is a great edition of the Dungeons and Dragons game. I'm quite impressed. I think that they've done a very good job, and a lot of the great elements of what came before are there, and a lot of the nonsense and chaff has just been left behind. So nice, clean new edition. I'm very impressed with it, and I enjoy playing it.
What do you
I've got a
hope might be
question.
Okay, go ahead.
So since we have both the writer and the editor here for Dragon Kings, one of the things that kind of comes up a lot in conversation is the way that the Sorcerer Kings sort of grant their Templars magic. And the way you described it in that book was by these elemental vortices, which are these sort of living things that they somehow got to transfer the magic to their Templars. So can you just shine any light on that, what you thought about it, initially, and that it kind of affected the setting?
From a conceptual standpoint, we just really wanted to have an explanation. And I think when we came up with the idea of the vortices and those potentially having a consciousness and an agenda and all of that, for the most part, we were laying the groundwork for some additional stories and novels down the line, probably most of which never really got touched upon, to be honest with you. But having an explanation as opposed to not having an explanation is always best. So, but I don't know where, Alan, you thought that was going when we were working on that at the time.
I think it was a good attempt to address the fundamental paradox that you wanted priests, but you didn't want gods. I remember talking with Troy Denning at the time and commenting that, where you've got this sort of desert hard scrabble life with tribes and warring city states, it seemed like it would be a natural opportunity to introduce what I think still remains the ultimate taboo in D&D campaign settings, monotheism. And I suggested to him, why is there not some cult pushing a single great omnipotent God? And he said, why would anyone follow a god that didn't grant you spells? And I said, people do. And it seemed like the landscape that you created with Athos was very similar to the Levant, and it could have led to exactly that that kind of cultural development. But I think that was maybe a bridge too far.
Well, we tried on so many levels from back to the initial concept of what would eventually become Dark Sun. We felt very unfettered, and that we could do anything we wanted to. And in many ways, a lot of our original ideas, well, let's just take a look at what's been done in all the previous campaign settings for D&D, and let's do the opposite. So all of them had gods, so we decided to get rid of gods. And so we thought that in our initial design, if you'll recall, we had actually dispensed with all of the other character races except for humans, and we're going to create entirely new ones. We eventually abandoned that plan, but we were really out there just looking at what's been done before. How could we switch it all around? And even that concept got, we kept the races, but then we twisted each one of them. I mean, there hadn't been cannibal halflings before. That's, so we tried to give them all their own new, unique flavor, but still give people a handle on it who've played the game before, something to connect to. So I think it worked out pretty good.
Definitely.
Yeah, how do you look back on the whole setting now, the whole project?
Well, mostly just nostalgia, to be honest with you. I mean, I think the setting itself is a lot of fun. Obviously I've done further work creating things that are very much like it. My own Dragon King setting that is going to re-release under Strange Owl Games here sometime this coming year. So that's all very fun. But the idea, the game itself projected so many of the key essential things that I would put into really anything that I would design. So, and in that regard, I want to keep some of those things going in. For instance, the idea that the casting of magic has consequences. Magic is a very powerful thing, but to do so has a cost. I like that balancing factor. Those are sort of things that I like to move on. I'm glad that's part of the legacy of the game and the setting. But again, just as I think of Dark Sun these days, I have to think of it more honestly in career terms. It's just it's for me, it's very nostalgic back to an earlier time in my own writing career, the things I was making then, how much fun I was having doing it, who I was doing it with, including you, Alan. And all those things it's just a great, big, happy bunch of memories in my life. And I'm so glad that I got to be a part of it.
Do you stay in touch with any of the other creators?
Troy and I get back and forth just once in a while. I haven't done anything with Brom since he helped me get covers and other materials together for Dragon Kings, and that's been several years ago now. And yeah, I really haven't been in touch with Mary. I'm in touch with Robert quite a bit, and other people who are fans. But the old TSR gang has gone, a zillion directions, and everybody's off on their other and later careers, I guess is the best way to put that now.
The people here might not know about your later musical career. Tim, tell them about that.
Oh, well, I live here in Las Vegas. I still play guitar in bands and sing and dance and have fun because that's just that's something I've been involved with for many years. And, I just like to do that too. I have a life of sidelines. They're all sidelines and they build up into one pretty fun life. But yeah, that's good fun.
There's a good if anybody likes kind of prog music, Tim and some other folks did a soundtrack for his Dragon King game that is super cool. I listen to that every now and again. I love it. Both the instrumental and the lyric version are great.
Yeah, that was a fun project. We had some really good musicians working on that. Frank Klepacki was part of that. He's out here as a Vegas guy. He does a lot of work in computer games and computer game music. We also had Mike Stone, who's a guitar player from the band Queensryche. He did a lot of the work on that as well. Yeah, it was a tremendous amount of fun. And yeah, it's out there if you want to pick it up.
Alan, so I was just looking at your RPG Geek profile, and you've written for so many systems, which is awesome, and a ton of D&D. But how did you actually get involved into Dark Sun?
I was working basically freelance for TSR and a variety of contracts for a variety of their campaign settings. There was a large and talented staff of designers that Tim ended up running, but there was also this whole platoon of freelance contractors who would do gig work, basically. And I was brought in to do the Veiled Alliance as, I think, the very first project that I worked on
I think
Dark
so.
Sun. I was very pleased to take my cue from the work that Troy had done in defining the city states there, in terms of giving each one its own emblematic culture, largely based on Earth cultures. And so I kind of took that and ran with that and added in more cultural detail and some sort of gazetteer type material that I gather has proven very popular among the Dark Sun fans even down to this day. I was
For sure.
sitting in on Jack's panel just an hour ago, and someone was talking, showering praise on the Veiled Alliance guy who added all the details, and so I think that was very welcome. And Veiled Alliance was also interesting in that it highlighted the possibilities of Athos to encourage other kinds of campaign types that were not typical for TSR at the time, for D&D at the time. It's a kind of, if you want to run it that way, the Veiled Alliance campaign framework is a very dark, kind of paranoid espionage style of secret societies, and you're never quite sure why you are being sent on this mission or who's doing it or what you're trying to accomplish, and you may not even know whether you accomplished the goals that they had. It's all depending on how dark you want to play it. It can be a very mysterious kind of secret agent sort of campaign, which you did not see in a lot of D&D fantasy. It's very good. The whole Dark Sun setting is very good that way. You can be dune traders running caravans. You can be espionage agents. You can be out there just trying to knock over entire city states. It has a scope to it that I never saw in any other campaign setting. So I just want to shower praise on Tim again there for that.
Thank you.
So I don't know if you know, so in 4th edition, the Ashes of Athas campaign is actually kind of like, it starts with the Veiled Alliance, and you're all kind of Veiled Alliance members. So that's really like the longest campaign that exists. I think it's like 24 adventures. And so it's a huge campaign that I was lucky to write a few and edit a few of those. So so yeah, we embraced the Veiled Alliance, going to different cities and being undercover, but also, there was a huge like big fight in the end of fighting a huge kind of primordial thing, which was something basically an elemental, but was all good stuff.
I was so surprised when I was checking back through the Dark Sun line. I had previously been sort of unfamiliar with the later line, and I was pleased to see that for the 4th edition version, the revised Dark Sun campaign setting book by Bill Slavisek, he actually, in every city-state entry, he ends up with what the Veiled Alliance is doing there in that particular city-state.
Yep, definitely important.
So we have Alex, I believe, has a question, so I'm going to unmute him. And
Hi.
Hello.
So, Alan, you wrote the Veiled Alliance book, but there's a short story in there that we never get to see the end unless you open a certain Dragon magazine.
That was that I had written an early story called The Year of Priest Defiance, that for Dragon magazine, that was actually kind of intended as a sort of an origin story for the Veiled Alliance, I think, and that seemed to be a natural fit for my Veiled Alliance source book. And so I included it at the whole text of the story as part of the last chapter, the campaigning chapter. And unfortunately, as happened with almost every one of my books, I ran way long, and I just wrote too long. I am by nature a wordy bastard, as perhaps you have already seen, And so the editor, Doug Stewart, decided to sort of cut where it would fit. And he said it worked at the time. And I'm not convinced that it did, but
No.
at least it was an effort. It was a good try.
I would say it took me years to discover the complete version existed, and when I read it, it floored me because I'm a sucker for those types of stories that you were writing in there. It's like a mix between a, a story representing something real or maybe a myth, like a Thousand and One Nights type of story. Don't know if it's real or not.
I did not do much fiction, but in my career, but I did. Most of the fiction that I did ended up being published for TSR. I had another couple of stories in Dragon magazine, and in fact, what maybe my favorite short story of my works is one I collaborated with the late Aaron Alston for the Dark Sun line, and it's called Boneyard Lights, and it appeared in Asticlean Gambit. It really turned out to be quite a nice work because Aaron is was such a talented writer, and he died a few years ago. I still miss him, but it was a great way to get at the culture of Gulg, the African-based city-state there, and I feel like it was the most effective visualization I had ever done of one of these one of the campaign settings cultures.
Indeed, the birds, the forests, the nights, you were quite transported into Gulg, which none of the other books actually succeed. You just imagine trees and that's it. Yeah. But one last detail about Water and Ashes, which is the actual name apparently of the story. You took an incredibly uh, silly magic item from Dungeon and Dragon, the Elm of Alignment Change, and you made it an incredible part of the story, which really makes the story possible because otherwise it wouldn't work. And I thought in a million years I would never see anybody write anything intelligent about a Helm of Alignment Change. So that's
the challenge was made.
Thanks, Alex. Appreciate it. So I have a question for Tim.
Yeah.
Tim, so on Dragonkins, there's no psionicist advanced being. Was that purposeful? This question might have gotten asked plenty of times in the last 30 years, but yeah, was it purposeful? Some of the questions are always asked, like psionic powers on Dark Sun augment the other classes. But some of the other classes just didn't get any augmentation. And looking at through your design lens at the next iterations of D&D and how they created certain classes like the Warlock and the Sorcerer, any ideas that you'd care to share on what advanced beings you would design for those classes?
Well, I guess in hindsight, we knew we'd have the advanced beings for the Evangelion and whatnot, but we didn't create one for psionics just because we felt psionics is a unique and such a different animal, and we thought we just wanted to first and foremost make a distinction. Any speculation along those lines, at least my own part, was probably never made it onto paper, is basically that any advanced being would be such a being of pure thought that where would we actually put that in the game and how would we run such a thing as that? But I think that the way that some of those powers get incorporated in some of the later classes and later editions of the game, I think has been quite imaginative. But we didn't intentionally try to create a groundwork for any of that, but I think maybe somehow we did.
Thanks, much appreciated. I've got another one, and this one is for both Tim and Alan. Populations in Dark Sun. We've gone amongst the fan community. There's always this question about the city-state population. Is the city-state population that's listed, which is listed in Alan's book for the first time, is that just the city-state proper, or is it the entirety of the verdant plains around it?
I was just making up what sounded plausible. Uh, I I feel like I don't. After 30 years, I'm not really qualified to speculate on that, Tim.
uh, uh, when those numbers came up at first, it was my assumption that they referred to those people living within the walls of the city-state itself, not necessarily the surrounding area. And the surrounding area, in most cases, is something you couldn't possibly measure anyway, or not accurately. So I always took those numbers to be in the city walls, in the environs of the city-state itself.
Saved.
Okay.
That brings up a question. So in Lynn Abbey's book, she writes about I think it's like 10 towns that are kind of around the city-state. And that's not really talked about anywhere else, that other cities have that, but it would make sense. Like, is that something that you think that would make sense for other cities as well?
We felt the same way. We actually adopted when Troy originally drew the first map, and of course it's sort of Colorado shaped for two reasons. We used a Colorado shaped piece of paper, and after that, Troy being a real son of Colorado, he just definitely wanted Athas to embrace all of the crazy mountains and deserts and terrain types of his home state. But the other thing we adopted was the notion that was pioneered really in the Forgotten Realms, that the maps themselves really just show you the major features, and you can expect that there are lots of other cities, roads, towns, little rivers everywhere on that Forgotten Realms map that aren't depicted at scale. And we felt the same was true in our Dark Sun map, that little tiny villages, they're probably everywhere, and little tiny outposts and enclaves and all this other stuff, and they're just not on there. We assume they're all over. So what Lynn did in her books, very much captured our original intent.
So this is news to me. So you can say that the guy who wrote the Veiled Alliance book knew nothing about that, and you can just fix things as you wish.
Remember, we created this game in an era where communication was by letter and telephone. So, the internet was just coming along. Emails were something totally new.
No,
I had to send in my manuscripts on 5 1/4-inch floppy disks, and then eventually on 3 1/2-inch floppy disks. I remember that I wrote one supplement for Marvel Superheroes where the night before it was about to send it in, and I wrote I typed the DOS command wrong and deleted the entire supplement.
Oh my goodness.
that took
a bad day.
A few years off my life. That's when my hair turned.
Sorry to hear it.
Yeah.
So Alan, I saw that on the Veiled Alliance book. The cell structure looks a lot like an insurgent structure. I'm in the military, so right away, every time I look at that, I'm like, man, this is exactly what we would template an insurgency to look like, especially out in the field and stuff. But did you use any military doctrine to build that cell structure, or how did you come about it?
I used Robert Heinlein's "The Moon is a Harsh Mistress," and that was where Heinlein described the sort of pyramidal structure as an improvement on the traditional two-dimensional structure. And I had a whole complicated pyramid to be visualized, and I guess that just proved to be a little bit too much for the artist, and so he came up with this very flat presentation that it still confuses me to this day. And as it happens, I did in fact find on YouTube a mobile. It's a hanging mobile that it has these sort of iterative fractal pyramids, and I am going to put up a link to that to the ternary tree mobile by mathematician Henry Segerman, and everyone now can understand exactly what a Veiled Alliance structure is supposed to look like.
Nice.
Awesome.
That is the value that I bring to today's meeting.
Ah,
That's
interesting.
great. That's great. And we'll make sure for all our listeners we'll include that link in the a Bone Stone and Obsidian podcast, as
For sure.
well as on our Facebook group.
So glad to clear that up after all these years.
So I had the good fortune to get some of the old documents from City State of Tier that Walter Bass originally wrote, and so like there was a few things here and there that kind of got cut. You had mentioned that some of the story got cut. Was there anything else, in addition to the obviously the way this pyramid structure looks? Was there anything else that you can remember that you're like, oh shoot, I really missed that piece or anything like that?
I don't remember anything very much. When I was looking back through the Veiled Alliance again after all these years ahead of this meeting, I realized that was the moment that I experimented very briefly with writing in E prime, which is a form of English where you don't use any form of the verb to be. So you never say anything is or are something. You have to use active verbs all through. And I wrote that entire supplement in E prime, which was a task. And I have to say, it reads a little bit weird now. Even at the time, it struck me that everything sounded like a National Geographic caption. And then Doug Stewart was not quite clear on that, and he actually introduced a few is's and r's. So I'm not going to say it's 100% E prime, but it was that was what struck me most about that supplement after all these decades. I don't remember that there was anything signally missing from the final published work that I had tried to put in.
Well, thanks. Thanks for that, Alan. Tim, I have another question.
Yeah.
So, given that you co-wrote the main campaign setting and then did Dragon Kings, and then that's it. I mean, after that, many other authors wanted in on Dark Sun and continued to develop the world. What other areas did you want to explore but didn't get a chance to?
Yeah, Troy Denning and I have talked about this over the years, and we had both had such a great opportunity helping to create the Dark Sun universe, but then both of us, our career paths took us away from being the custodians of the game world itself, because he went on to do novels and novels almost exclusively, and I went off into management, so I wasn't contributing a whole lot to this setting after a while either. So those people who became its custodians did an excellent job and made a lot of great products, and we were very happy with how the line progressed. For myself, the one thing that I thought, had I been more actively involved in the universe, my ambition, I think I've said this in other interviews, was that this little portion of Athos that we had described was going to eventually be kind of, if you figure out this is the last bastion of the limited humanoid civilization on all of the planet, and pretty much the far side of the planet is all dominated by some gigantic Thri-Kreen Roman Empire sort of thing that would lead to a lot of John Carter of Mars type exploration and things like that. None of that got ever developed. I didn't push it. I didn't want to force that on anybody who was continuing with the design of Athos or the Dark Sun universe. But could I go back in time and create all of that and make that part of the focus of future play? I mean, that would be, I think, so much fun to go explore that kind of a setting rooted in the original Dark Sun universe.
Well, Tim
Awesome.
Tim Beach he wrote Thri-Kreen of Athos, and he definitely alluded to that, which was fantastic. That was such a great interview as well. Yeah, Thri-Kreen are awesome.
they really are. They were just too much fun. They were sitting there writing the players, or the newly created Monstrous Manual, and it's like, oh, we've got to build these into Dark Sun. That just has to happen. So
So
right.
Tim, a follow-up to that. So we
Yeah.
can definitively say that the insectoid races are the dominant race that remain on Athas.
That was my plan, most definitely. Yes.
Okay, so we have a couple questions. I'm going to go first to Quentin and then to Alec.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Hi, my name is Quinton. Very pleased to meet you all. I'm phoning in from South Africa, actually, and I just wanted to say, but yeah, this is less of a. I do have a question, but less of a question and more of a thank you to all of you. Thank you to the organizers for organizing this AthasCon, because the dark sun setting. Is a beautiful setting, and it's very niche and unique, and it was hard to find a community around it until I did a little bit of digging. And when I found AthasCon, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you to both you, Timothy and Alan, for doing all the writing that you've done, because just recently I've been sort of setting up a bunch of campaigns, and I've run the same campaign now with 5 different groups, all in the same month over one weekend, and it has brought a world of joy to each and every one who've been playing it, because it really is such a unique setting, and it's gotten the intensity of it all has brought sort of like the cravings to continue playing D&D and making our own stories. So thank you so much. Leading into like just a quick question, because I love the setting so much. I was wondering, has anybody ever approached you guys about making a live action movie or an animated series that is set in the Dark Sun setting? I know IDW did a comic book series for a little while. But I haven't really ever heard anything about like movies being made or TV series. So yeah, if you don't mind answering that question, that would be lovely.
Well, thanks. I appreciate all your kind words about the setting, and I'm glad you're enjoying it so much and your friends as well. As far as television or movie production, there was, in my tenure at TSR, there was nobody who actually approached saying they wanted to specifically make a movie about the Dark Sun setting. We were just really in those days getting the first nibbles and bites of people who wanted to come in and make a Dungeons and Dragons movie at all. And even that took many years, and there were fits and starts about all of that. Now, but I haven't been part of the TSR WotC Hasbro sphere for the better part of 25 years at this point. So whether or not anybody has come in the meantime specifically to say they wanted to make a movie or TV series about Dark Sun, I couldn't say. None exists, but we also know for various reasons Hasbro and WotC have elected to basically keep Dark Sun in a drawer for some future development, or if they have great new plans for it, I couldn't tell you what they are. And if anybody else on this panel knows what they are, I'd love to hear them.
I was hoping to use your psionic powers to, get some intel.
I've been trying for so long, and it's just never really worked out in that regard.
So pleased to hear from someone from South Africa. I actually lived for a couple of months in Cape Town, South Africa. Just a beautiful city, living inside a Table Mountain, and it was just a gorgeous time. And the whole country is just so pretty. And so I hope to return someday, see the flowers of Namakwa land and so on.
Nice. Oh, fantastic. I'm glad that you visited, and we'd love to have you all back. And to anybody here on the panel who hasn't visited, please do come over and feel free to hit me up. I'm on the Discord. So but yeah, no, definitely. If there's no movie happening just yet, then perhaps it's time to that we get one going, maybe. Indeed. Thank you so much.
We're going to move to our next question by Alex and then Jason.
Alan, maybe a quick two-parter. How much of actual terrorists, in a sense, did you visualize the Veiled Alliance members to be? Like noble knights fighting against the oppression of the Sorcerer Kings? Or somebody perfectly able to slit the throat of somebody else to further the ends of the Alliance? because you kind of skirt the limits in between, kind of saying you do what you want, it's your campaign. But did you have some kind of opinion? Should it be brutal or noble?
Well, it seemed like the note that was being struck constantly in the Dark Sun line before I wrote the Veiled Alliance was that it's a very pragmatic place. And, there is no room for high ideology when you're just struggling to survive. And the Veiled Alliance as an organization, as I made very clear in the text, is not an organization of high ideals. It is strictly a protective organization, and individual chapters in individual cities may have goals of greater or lesser integrity and of greater ambition or lesser. All of that to me seems very much a matter of campaign choice. So I always tend to veer toward the more idealistic and upbeat kind of stick it to the man kind of revolutionary fighting, but that is not to everyone's taste, and it certainly is not necessarily part of the Dark Sun ethos and the ethos. And so I basically never tried to picture them in any particular way. I could well imagine that any given member of the Veiled Alliance is very happy to slit a throat if it's going to get him out of trouble.
Um, the Veil Alliance does show up in Denning's mostly one book, and then a short appearance in Nibene in another book of the Prison Panthead. Were you at all? I can't for the love of me remember the calendar, so the which one came first. But did you add any kind of mutual input as to what the alliance should actually be like in a novel?
I think Troy was very much his own man with those novels, and maybe Tim can comment on that.
Yeah, I think that I mean, basically with the storylines that were going in the novels, Troy very much had free reign. Now he read a lot of the material that's being written elsewhere about the setting, everything that was going on in the design of the role-playing universe, and for the most part, he tended to take that well to heart, but didn't necessarily let it guide him as he created really anything in the novels line. So there are departures, and that's often the case in pretty much any shared universe situation. But yeah, I think his interpretation is an acceptable one and a fun one. So it worked well for the novels, and really didn't negate anything that's in the written material for the role-playing setting. So it all balances out.
And the final thing, perhaps, Alan, is rereading the book Veiled Alliance. I was excited to see there was a section called Villages and Oases. I'm flipped to it. It's like 2 pages long. So did you ever consider that, in a sense, the Veiled Alliance is the only organization of preservers, and they're in the cities? Or are there, in a sense, other organizations of preservers, but they're just not in the cities? Just like you could have something secret in the desert, or are wizards just too rare, in a sense, for it to happen in a world like Athas?
Sounds pretty cool. For an individual DM, that seems like that would be a natural path to explore if that interests you. It seems I think in retrospect, it was kind of a misstep in the Veiled Alliance when I started talking about demographics and talking about what percentage of people are spellcasters versus the regular population. I think, in retrospect, I think that was too doctrinaire. I tried here and there to say, well, obviously you will change this according to your own needs, but I don't think I stressed that quite well enough. And the question of whether magicians or spellcasters are rare is very much a matter of the individual story you want to tell. And the way I was describing the demographics there, it was I was making them pretty rare, and the idea that there could be even more than 1 or 2 preservers in a given little oasis town, that would not fit the numbers that I was bandying about in that book. But you should change the numbers so that, yeah, sure, there could be plenty of individual small sects of the Veiled Alliance or of completely different preserver organizations scattered all across the landscape of Colorado.
And I do. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Alex. We're going to get to our last question by Jason, and then we're going to close with some author. What's going on? What are we doing? What are you doing in the future? So, last question, Jason.
All right. Thanks very much. Thanks also to our guest commentator, our guest panelists here, and the moderator, and the people who organized this awesome conference. I really, really love the Dark Sun setting, and I must confess that I love it so much I take it with me to other game systems that I try out besides D&D. So I played Numenera, and we have Athas in Numenera, and we play out, sort of game, events of the Prism Pentad.
That's a good fit.
I can't wait to tell Monty that.
Well, great. Yeah, I would love for him to hear that. We've also run using Rowan Rook and Deckard's Spire / Heart system. We've enjoyed Athas. And there's different, because the mechanics themselves come with different emphases. I was wondering, like, clearly I wouldn't be so bold as to say everything goes, where Dark Sun Monopoly would represent the setting or something. But I was wondering if you had thoughts on, degrees of fit for, not just second edition D&D rules, but like other ways people might explore this really, really fun setting, in other I guess mechanical aspects. It's a general
Fire
question.
Is a super terrific choice for that. They've got a whole rebellion system that they've got under an open license. So everybody get right to work on adapting that. That seems like a natural. It's entirely about being oppressed by a bunch of super powerful bastards and organizing a revolution to overthrow them. Man, I can't believe I never thought of that.
Well, thank you very much.
I'm sorry, any comments on that, Tim?
Yeah, I guess basically we wanted to keep, of course, we wanted to make a game system or a game universe that would work with the second edition of D&D. That was, those were our marching orders. But where we could take departures, we did. And I think, I think the whole idea of what is preserving magic and what is defiling magic is something that that's just, as long as you're bringing that mechanic along with you in some form to another game system, then I think you still got a very Dark Sun universe to work with. I think as long as you bring those along, to me, it's still a Dark Sun setting.
Thanks, appreciate it, Jason. Excellent question. So we're almost out of our time right now. We've got about 3 minutes. So first, I want to thank everybody for attending. Tim and Alan, especially. Dark Sun wouldn't be what it is without you guys, and of course to the awesome community that we have that consistently has continued to advocate for Dark Sun over the last 31 years that the game system has come out. Our last question here is basically, what are you doing now? And I'll leave Tim and then Alan. What are you doing now in design perspective that you'd want the fans to know about? Tim and then Alan.
Okay. I'm still heavily involved in role-playing games. I've been in close association with Ulysses Spiele out of Germany, where we've done a lot of publication of their game, Das Schwarze Auge and The Dark Eye, bringing that into English. And through them, we've breathed life into a few nostalgic role-playing lines like Torg, now Torg Eternity, and Fading Suns, with a split-off company that's just based here in the United States now called Strange Owl Games that I am heading up. We're about to release Space 1889 as a new revival of that game, and moving forward into next year, we have a brand new design of a great new system and presentation for my Dragon King setting, which is a spiritual successor to many of the ideas that I pioneered in Dark Sun. So all of those things are going on. Check things out at strangeowlgames.com and keep up with what I'm doing.
I
Alan, what are
run
you up
a
to?
website called The Bundle of Holding. It's www.bundleofholding, all one word.com. And it's it's a site that sells time limited offers of role playing game PDFs and ebooks in the manner of Humble Bundle and other sites like that. And I've been running that for most of 10 years now, and it's been a very good gig. But I have been missing game design, and so next year my wife Beth Fiske and I are planning to kickstart a new 5th edition campaign supplement organized around the Magnificent Mansion spell, the 7th level wizard spell that conjures a beautiful, luxurious mansion for you. And we figure out a way to make that kind of opulent luxury available even to low-level characters without breaking the game. So we're going to do a mansion supplement next year that I hope will help increase the comfort level of beginning characters everywhere.
Adventure in style.
There you go.
That's great. Rob, do you have anything?
No, thank you so much, Alan and Tim. Always good to see you.
Thanks for having us.
Very glad to be
gentlemen,
here.
thank you. Thank you very much. And on behalf of AthasCon, we hope to see you again in the future. Thanks, everybody, for all your participation, and keep hope alive.